The cursor blinked on the blank white field with a merciless, metronomic insistence. Tick-tock, tick-tock, as if counting down the seconds of her professional incompetence. Olivia stared at it, her mind as empty as the screen before her. The project for Ethelred Cosmetics, a rebrand of their new premium line, was a glaring red flag in her calendar. The deadline was yesterday. She had begged for an extension, blaming a sudden migraine, but the truth was far more humiliating. She simply couldn't. The brain fog. That was her own non-medical term for it. A thick, sticky, gray substance that had seeped into her consciousness months ago and had only grown denser since. Her mind used to be a sharply honed instrument. Ideas would flash like supernovas. Concepts would arrange themselves into sleek, elegant systems. She was Olivia Reed, one of the most sought-after graphic designers in the city. A woman who could create a soul for a brand out of thin air. Now that instrument was dull and rusted. She would forget clients' names during video calls. She'd lose her train of thought mid-sentence. Sometimes, walking from the bedroom to the kitchen of their vast, sun-drenched loft, she would stop in the middle of the room, unable to remember why she had started walking in the first place. She pressed the heels of her palms to her temples and squeezed gently. Outside the window, the morning city sprawled, bristling with skyscrapers, humming with an invisible current of life. Their loft, perched on the 27th floor, was like an aquarium floating above the chaos. Jonas, her husband, had designed it himself. Minimalism pushed to its absolute. Concrete walls, polished floors, floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, and an almost complete absence of furniture. Space needs to breathe, live, he'd say. Purity of line fosters purity of thought. The irony was that there was no purity left in her thoughts. Quiet footsteps sounded behind her. Jonas. She recognized his walk. Light, confident, like a man who knows exactly where he is going and why. He came up behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders, his palms warm and reassuring. "Working again, my love? I've asked you to rest more." His voice, as always, was like velvet, enveloping. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. He smelled of expensive cologne with notes of sandalwood and freshly brewed coffee. Jonas was the epitome of success and stability. Tall, fit, with perfectly styled dark hair, and eyes the color of a stormy sky. A brilliant architect whose avant-garde projects graced the covers of magazines. The kind of husband one could only dream of. "I just wanted to sketch out a few ideas," she lied. "While I have the inspiration." He gently turned her chair to face him and crouched down, looking into her eyes. His gaze was full of what seemed to be sincere concern. "You're taking on too much. This project is draining the life out of you. Look at yourself, you're so pale." He brushed the back of his hand against her cheek. His touch was gentle, but something inside Olivia tightened. She didn't like this feeling, of being weak, of being the object of his care. She was used to being a partner, an equal. "I'm fine, Jonas. Just a little tired." "Exactly. Which is why I've prepared your morning elixir. 5 minutes, and you'll be ready to conquer the world." He winked and walked over to the kitchen, which was an extension of the living room. An island of stainless steel, built-in appliances, not a single superfluous detail. Olivia watched him go. He really did take care of her. When this fog began, he had surrounded her with a kind of solicitude that was at times suffocating. He personally booked her appointments with the best doctors, who in the end, only shrugged and blamed it all on stress and burnout. He took over all the cooking, insisting that proper nutrition was the key to recovery. He even canceled their planned trip to Italy, saying she needed rest, not exhausting flights. Everything he did was dictated by love. So why did an unpleasant, irrational feeling claw at the back of her mind? The sense that she was being placed in a cage? A beautiful, spacious cage with a panoramic view, but a cage nonetheless. She stood up and walked to the kitchen island, watching his precise, economical movements. He was a perfectionist in all things. The ingredients for the smoothie were already laid out on the countertop. Spinach, a banana, a handful of berries, avocado, almond milk. A ritual repeated every morning. "We'll add a little spirulina today," Jonas commented without turning around. "For a detox." The blender whirred to life, filling the loft with a loud, monotonous hum. Jonas turned to a built-in cabinet, his back momentarily blocking her view of what he was doing. Olivia saw his hand slip into the pocket of the jacket hanging on the back of a chair. He pulled out something small. For a second, in the gap between his shoulder and the cabinet, a tiny unlabeled glass vial with a rubber stopper flashed into view, the kind used for injections. He deftly removed the stopper, poured a few drops of a colorless liquid into the whirring blender, and just as quickly hid the vial back in his pocket. The entire sequence took no more than 3 seconds. The motion was so practiced, so fleeting, that Olivia didn't immediately process what she had seen. The blender fell silent. Jonas turned to her, pouring the thick green mixture into a tall glass. A disarming smile lit up his face. "There we are. Your booster shot of vitality, madam." He held the glass out to her. Olivia froze, staring at the drink. The image of what she'd just witnessed flashed in her mind. The vial. The colorless liquid. The furtive movement. What did you add to it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice as casual as possible. Jonas's smile didn't waver. You noticed? I was just about to tell you. It's a new peptide complex, my love. For focus and improving neural connections. I ordered it from a private lab in Switzerland. A friend recommended it. Says it works wonders for mental fatigue. I wanted to surprise you. The explanation was flawless. Logical. Caring. It fit perfectly with the image of a loving husband willing to do anything to help his wife. Anyone in her place would have been touched. But she had seen him hide the vial. "Why is it unlabeled?" she asked, taking the glass. "It was cold to the touch." "It's an experimental batch," he replied just as easily, already washing the blender. "They don't release it for commercial sale yet. I got it through a connection. Don't worry, it's completely safe. I would never give you anything that hasn't been vetted." She looked at him, at his calm face, and felt paranoid. Of course. Jonas loved her. He was just trying to help. And she, with her foggy mind, was already seeing conspiracies where there were none. It was so foolish, so humiliating. "Thank you, my love," she said, forcing a smile. She brought the glass to her lips and took a sip. The taste was normal, sweet, with the grassy notes of spinach and spirulina. No foreign flavor. She took another sip. Then another. Jonas watched her with approval. "That's a good girl. Drink up. You need your strength." She finished the smoothie to the last drop, placed the empty glass on the counter, and felt a familiar apathy wash over her. Not sleepiness, no. It was more like indifference. As if someone had turned down the volume on her emotions and anxieties. The world became a little flatter, more distant. The desire to argue, to doubt, to analyze. It all receded, leaving a quiet compliance in its wake. She returned to her desk. The cursor was still blinking. But now, it didn't cause her any panic. It was just a fact. An empty screen. An empty mind. She sat like that for almost an hour, staring blankly at the city outside the window, until an email from her assistant popped up. "Olivia, the client has been waiting for your call for 20 minutes. She flinched as if struck. Again. She had forgotten again. The rest of the day passed in a haze. She stammered apologies to the client, promised something unintelligible, and then simply closed her laptop. She wandered through the enormous loft, touching the cold surfaces. Concrete, glass, steel. Jonas's house. The house he had built. Perfect. Sterile. And she was the only defective element within it. That evening, Jonas came home from work earlier than usual. He brought her favorite peonies and a takeout box from their favorite restaurant. "I decided you shouldn't cook tonight," he said, kissing her. "You look exhausted." He set the table. They ate in near silence. Olivia picked at her food, unable to taste it. The fog in her head had grown to its thickest. "I canceled our get-together with Mark and Lena on Saturday," Jonas announced casually, pouring wine. "I think it's better for you to stay home, in a quiet environment. Noisy crowds will only tire you out right now." She nodded. Mark and Lena were her best friends. She hadn't seen them in over a month. But she had no energy to argue. Jonas was probably right. She needed peace. Later, lying in bed, she watched his perfect profile in the moonlight that streamed through the panoramic window. He slept peacefully, breathing evenly. The perfect husband. The perfect life. The perfect care. But the image of the small, unlabeled vial surfaced again and again in her memory. The motion of his hand, hiding it in his pocket. Quick, secret. As if he were doing something she was never meant to see. You're just going crazy, Olivia, she told herself. But for the first time in long months, another, almost inaudible voice from the depths of her fogged consciousness whispered back. But what if you're not? And that question, quiet but insistent, stayed with her until morning, keeping sleep at bay. It was the first crack in the perfect facade of her life. And she knew that soon, more cracks would follow, threatening to bring the entire structure crashing down. The morning light, filtered through the immense glass walls of the loft, did not bring clarity. It only served to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, mocking particle in the vast, sterile space. Olivia woke up feeling as though she'd been dragged through murky water. Her limbs were heavy, her head a hollow cavern where thoughts echoed and died before they could fully form. The memory of the previous day, the smoothie, the vial, Jonas's easy explanation, felt distant, like a scene from a movie she'd half-watched. Jonas was already dressed, standing by the bed, a porcelain cup in his hand. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, his dark hair catching the light. He looked less like a man waking up, and more like a figure stepping out of a magazine advertisement for success. "Good morning, my love," he said, his voice a low, soothing hum. "I brought you some chamomile tea. I thought it might be better than coffee today. Gentler on your system." She pushed herself up, the silk sheets slithering down her body. "Thank you." He placed the cup on the minimalist bedside table, a single block of polished concrete. "I have that site visit in the valley today, the one for the Nakano project. It's an all-day affair. I've left a meal for you in the fridge. Quinoa salad with roasted vegetables. Just needs a drizzle of the lemon tahini dressing." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her. "Promise me you'll take it easy today. No work. Just rest. Read a book. Listen to music. Let your mind heal." "I promise," she murmured, the words feeling thick and foreign on her tongue. He leaned down and kissed her, a brief, proprietary press of his lips against hers. "Good girl. I'll call to check on you later." And then he was gone, the soft click of the front door echoing in the cavernous loft. Silence descended, broken only by the faint, ambient roar of the city far below. Olivia sat in bed for a long time, the tea growing cold beside her. "Let your mind heal." The phrase looped in her head. But what if her mind wasn't the thing that was sick? What if something was being done to it? "Stop it," she chided herself. "You're being paranoid. He's taking care of you." She finally forced herself to get up. The day stretched before her, an empty expanse of time she had to fill. She decided to try to work. Maybe the discipline, the familiar routine, would cut through the fog. She made herself a coffee, real coffee, strong and black, a small act of rebellion, and sat down at her desk. The screen lit up, showing the Ethelred Cosmetics project. She stared at the elegant, flowing font she had designed for their logo, but it felt like the work of a stranger. She tried to open the file with the packaging mock-ups, but her fingers felt clumsy on the trackpad. Her hand trembled as she reached for her coffee cup, and a few dark drops spilled onto the pristine white surface of the desk. "Damn it," she whispered, her voice cracking with frustration. She dabbed at the spill with a tissue, but a faint brown stain remained, a small, ugly imperfection in Jonas's perfect world. Tears of frustration pricked at her eyes. This wasn't her. The competent, controlled Olivia Reed would never be this shaky, this inept. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life, a pale imitation of the woman she used to be. Giving up on work, she began to wander the loft. It was a monument to Jonas's aesthetic. Every object had its place. Every line was clean, every surface uncluttered. There were no photographs, no sentimental knickknacks, none of the warm, chaotic clutter that makes a house a home. It was beautiful, but it was cold. It was his space. She was just living in it. Her path led her to his desk, a massive slab of reclaimed oak set against a concrete wall. It was, as always, immaculate. A sleek laptop, a single Moleskine notebook, a pen. Nothing else. But today something was different. The laptop was open. Jonas, the man who shut down and unplugged every device every single night, had left his laptop open. He must have been in a tremendous hurry. She reached out, intending to close it. It was an invasion of his privacy, a disruption of his perfect order. But as her fingers brushed against the cool metal, her elbow bumped the wireless mouse sitting beside it. The screen, which had been dark, flickered to life. A web browser was open. It wasn't the architectural software or the financial news site she expected to see. It was a search engine page. A list of recent queries glowed in the cool blue light of the screen. Her heart began to beat a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the list. Symptoms of slow alkaloid poisoning. Undetectable poisons causing neurological symptoms. Tetrodotoxin for sale, no prescription. How to mask poison taste in food smoothies. Long-term effects of benzodiazepine microdosing. Disposing of evidence post-mortem toxicology. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed out of her lungs. She gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling, her knuckles white. The words swam before her eyes, malevolent and sharp. This wasn't research for a book. This wasn't for a friend. This was a blueprint. A manual. Neurological symptoms. The brain fog. The memory loss. The confusion. Mask poison taste in food smoothies. The morning ritual. The sweet, green liquid she drank every single day. Tetrodotoxin. She vaguely remembered it from a documentary. Pufferfish poison. A potent neurotoxin. Her mind, suddenly sharp with terror, began to connect the dots with horrifying speed. The secret vial. The experimental peptides. His insistence on preparing all her food. His careful isolation of her from friends and colleagues. The doctors who could find nothing wrong. It wasn't a cage he was building around her. It was a tomb. A wave of nausea rose in her throat, hot and acidic. She stumbled back from the desk and sank onto one of the low, uncomfortable leather sofas. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the loft. Denial, a desperate, final defense, tried to surface. It has to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. Maybe his computer was hacked. Maybe he's worried someone is trying to poison him. But the logic was too flimsy, too pathetic. The search terms were a mirror of her reality. He wasn't the target. She was. The man she loved, the man she shared her bed with, the man who kissed her good morning and promised to take care of her, was methodically, scientifically, poisoning her. The realization was not a sudden crash but a slow, cold flood, filling every part of her being with ice. The love she felt for him curdled into something monstrous. Every tender gesture, every caring word, was now revealed as a calculated move in a terrifying game. His concern was a performance. His love was a lie. She looked around the loft, and for the first time, she saw it for what it truly was. The panoramic windows were not for the view. They were to ensure there were no hiding places. The minimalist design was not for aesthetic purity. It was to make it easy to control the environment, to ensure nothing could be hidden, nothing could be out of place. It was his laboratory, and she was the experiment. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She flinched, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. She looked at the screen. It was a text from Jonas. Thinking of you, my love. Hope you're resting. Feeling any better? Red heart. The red heart emoji at the end was a final, grotesque insult. She stared at the message, her hand trembling so violently she could barely hold the phone. He was checking on his project, monitoring his progress. She had to answer. If she didn't, he would know something was wrong. Panic would be a death sentence. She needed to be calm. She needed to be the same, pliable, slightly confused Olivia he had left that morning. With a monumental effort of will, she forced her shaking fingers to type a reply. Each letter was a struggle. Feeling a bit better, thank you. The quiet helps. Just resting like you said. Love you. She hit send. The performance had begun. From this moment on, her life depended on her ability to act. To smile when she wanted to scream. To accept his touch when she wanted to recoil in horror. To play the part of the willing, fading victim, while the real Olivia, the one who had just been violently awakened, scrambled for a way to survive. She stood up and walked back to his desk. She took out her phone and, with hands that still shook, she photographed the screen, capturing the list of damning search queries. It was the first piece of evidence. The first stone she would lay on the path to exposing him. The brain fog was gone. In its place was a terrifying, crystalline clarity. The paranoia she had dismissed as a symptom of her illness was, in fact, the sanest instinct she had. It was the part of her that had been fighting back all along, whispering warnings she hadn't been able to hear. Now she heard them loud and clear. The question was no longer, am I going crazy? It was, how do I get out of here alive? The photograph of the laptop screen burned in Olivia's phone. A digital ghost of Jonas's monstrous intent. But it wasn't enough. It was circumstantial. He could deny it, claim it was research for a fictional project, a dark curiosity. He was a master of plausible deniability. She had witnessed it just yesterday with his smooth explanation of the experimental peptides. To fight a man like Jonas, she needed something tangible, something he couldn't explain away with a charming smile and a lie. Her gaze fell on his desk again, specifically on the large, antique wooden chest that sat beneath it. It was a beautiful piece, dark mahogany with ornate brass fittings. A family heirloom he had once told her belonged to his grandfather. It was always locked. Just old architectural drawings and family papers. He'd said dismissively when she'd asked about it once. Nothing interesting. Now that casual dismissal seemed like a blaring alarm. The lock was old-fashioned, a skeleton key type. The key, he kept on his person at all times, on the same ring as the key to his prized vintage Porsche. But Olivia had watched him over the years. She knew his habits, his patterns. He was a creature of meticulous routine. And she knew that for his most precious things he had redundancies. Her heart hammering, she went to his bookshelf. It was filled with heavy, imposing tomes on architectural theory and history. She ran her fingers along the spines, pulling one out at random. The Poetics of Space. It felt unusually heavy. She opened it, and there, nestled in a hollowed-out section of the pages, was a small, ornate brass key. A spare. For a moment, she felt a dizzying surge of triumph, quickly followed by a cold wave of fear. She was crossing a line from which there was no return. She knelt before the chest, the key feeling cold and heavy in her trembling hand. It slid into the lock with a soft metallic whisper. She turned it. The click of the lock disengaging was deafening in the silent loft. It sounded like a bone snapping. It sounded like fate. She lifted the heavy lid. The scent of old paper and dust rose to meet her, a scent of buried history. The top layer was just as he'd said. Rolled up architectural blueprints, yellowed with age. She carefully lifted them out, her hands shaking so badly she was afraid she would tear the fragile paper. Beneath them was a stack of manila folders, held together by a faded red ribbon. Untying the ribbon felt like unwrapping a mummy. The first folder was labeled simply Finances. Inside were bank statements from an account she had never heard of, in a bank she didn't recognize. The account was solely in his name, Jonas Hale. She saw a series of regular, systematic transfers from their joint savings account into this secret one. Small amounts, always just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic bank notification. Over the past 2 years he had siphoned off nearly $100,000. The timeline corresponded perfectly with the onset of her illness. He was building a nest egg. A getaway fund for when the experiment was concluded. The cold in her veins intensified, seeping into her very marrow. This wasn't just a sick psychological game. It was a calculated financial plot. She put the folder aside and picked up the next one. It was thinner. On the tab, a single word was written in his neat, architectural script. Clara. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened it. The first document was a marriage certificate. Jonas Hale and Clara Rosales. Married 6 years ago. Olivia had been with Jonas for 4 years. He had told her he'd never been married, that his only serious relationship before her had ended amicably years ago. Another lie. A lie so fundamental, so vast, it reconfigured the entire landscape of their shared history. He hadn't just omitted a detail, he had erased a person. Beneath the marriage certificate was a small stack of photographs. A woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a cascade of dark, Curly hair smiled up at the camera, her arm linked with a younger, but instantly recognizable, Jonas. They were on a beach, squinting in the sun, looking happy. In another, they were toasting with champagne in a restaurant. Clara. She looked vibrant, full of life. Olivia felt a pang of ghostly kinship, a sorrow for this woman she had never known but whose fate now seemed inextricably linked with her own. The last document in the folder was a death certificate. Clara Hale, née Rosales. Age 32. Cause of death: acute cardiomyopathy secondary to rapidly progressing neurodegeneration of unknown etiology. Neurodegeneration of unknown etiology. The phrase was a clinical, sterile mask for something horrific. It was a medical shoulder shrug, an admission of ignorance. And in that ignorance a murderer could hide. Olivia read the supplementary notes from the coroner. They described the symptoms Clara had exhibited in the months leading up to her death. Chronic fatigue, memory lapses, confusion, dizzy spells. It was her own life, written down on an official form, a prelude to a death that had already happened. She felt like she was going to be sick. She stumbled to the bathroom, her hand clamped over her mouth, and retched into the toilet, but only bitter bile came up. She knelt there on the cold tile, gasping for air, her body convulsed with shudders that were part fear, part grief. Grief for Clara. Grief for the life she thought she had. When the heaving stopped, she splashed cold water on her face and looked at her reflection in the vast, frameless mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face pale and gaunt. The subtle, creeping poison had already left its mark, hollowing her out from the inside. She had to keep going. She had to know everything. She returned to the chest. At the very bottom, beneath the folders, was a small velvet-lined box. It looked like a jewelry box, but it was too heavy. She opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were 6 glass vials, identical to the one she had seen him use that morning. Unlabeled, filled with the same clear, innocuous liquid. And next to them, in its own compartment, lay a single, unused syringe. The sight of the syringe sent a fresh wave of terror through her. This was the endgame. When the slow, subtle method was no longer sufficient, or when the time came for the final act, this was the tool he would use. A direct, undeniable, lethal injection. He hadn't just planned for her slow decline. He had planned for her death. She took out her phone again, her hands now steady with a grim, cold resolve. She photographed everything. The secret bank statements. The marriage certificate. The photographs of Clara. The death certificate, zooming in on the cause of death and the description of her symptoms. The box of vials. The syringe. Each photo was a nail she was hammering into his coffin. She carefully placed everything back in the chest, exactly as she had found it. She retied the ribbon, replaced the blueprints, and locked it. She put the key back in the hollowed-out book, and placed the book back on the shelf. Her movements were precise, methodical. She was thinking like him now, covering her tracks. The discovery had changed everything. The vague, formless terror had crystallized into a hard, sharp certainty. This was not a man who had snapped. This was a predator. A serial predator who had honed his methods, perfected his performance, and was now reprising his greatest role with a new leading lady. The anger, hot and fierce, began to burn away the edges of her fear. He had not just tried to kill her. He had tried to erase her, to make her doubt her own mind, to gaslight her into her own grave. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken her love for weakness, her trust for stupidity. That was the mistake that would be his undoing. She walked back to her desk and sat down. The blinking cursor no longer seemed mocking. It seemed like a starting point. A blank page on which she would write a new story. Not a story of a fading victim, but a story of survival. A story of a hunt, where the prey turns the tables on the hunter. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her finger hovered over the name of her best friend, Lena. She wanted to call, to scream for help, to pour out the whole insane, terrifying story. But she couldn't. Jonas monitored her calls. He'd mentioned it casually. Just to make sure you're not overexerting yourself with long conversations. A call to Lena would be an immediate red flag. She couldn't risk it. Then she thought of someone else. Someone from Jonas's world, but not quite in it. His Aunt Elin. A sharp, 70-year-old woman with eyes that seemed to see right through you. She and Jonas had a strained, formal relationship. At their last family dinner, Elin had taken Olivia aside. "You're a sensible girl," she'd said, her voice low. "Don't let my nephew's charm blind you. He has a habit of redecorating his life when he gets bored. Be careful you don't end up as old furniture." At the time, Olivia had dismissed it as the cynical rambling of a lonely old woman. Now it sounded like a prophecy. Elin lived an hour away, in a small town that felt a world apart from the city. Jonas would never expect her to go there. She looked at the clock. It was almost noon. Jonas wouldn't be back until late. She had time. She grabbed her purse, her car keys, and one of the vials from the chest, wrapping it carefully in a silk scarf and tucking it into an inside pocket. As she walked to the door, she glanced back at the loft. The sun streamed in, making the space look bright and beautiful. A perfect home. A perfect lie. A perfect tomb. She closed the door behind her, the soft click sealing her old life inside. She was stepping out into a new, terrifying world. But for the first time in months, she was stepping into it with her eyes wide open. The hunt had begun. You knew about Clara?" Olivia asked. "I knew of her," Elin corrected, her eyes distant. "Jonas brought her here once for Christmas. She was a lovely girl. A nurse. Full of life just like you. Smart too. Maybe too smart for her own good." She took a sip of her tea, her hand now trembling as well. A few years later, he called to say she had passed away. A sudden illness, he said. A rare neurological disorder. He was so convincing in his grief. He played the part of the devastated widower perfectly. He even managed to produce a few tears. She snorted a harsh, bitter sound. "I almost believed him. But something felt wrong. Jonas doesn't grieve. He assesses, calculates, and moves on. His grief was a performance. I tried to ask questions, to get more details, but he shut me down. Became cold and distant. Accused me of not respecting his loss." Elin leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Olivia's. "About a week before she died, Clara called me. She was frantic. Hysterical. She said she thought Jonas was poisoning her. She said she felt foggy, confused, that she was losing her mind. She said he was controlling her, isolating her." Elin's voice broke, and for the first time, Olivia saw a glimmer of tears in the old woman's fierce eyes. "And what did I do?" she whispered, her voice thick with self-loathing. "I told her to calm down. I told her she was likely unwell, that the illness was making her paranoid. I told her that Jonas loved her, that he was taking care of her. I didn't believe her. I chose to believe the charming lie over the horrifying truth, because it was easier. And a week later, she was dead." The guilt radiating from Elin was a palpable force in the room. She had been the one person Clara had reached out to, and she had turned her away. Now, years later, history was repeating itself with chilling precision. And Elin was being given a second chance, a chance to atone. "I will not make that mistake again," Elin said, her voice regaining its steely resolve. "He will not take you to." She stood up and went to an old writing desk in the corner of the room. She pulled out a notepad and a pen. "This changes everything. We need a plan. We need evidence that no one can dismiss as the ravings of a sick woman." She turned to Olivia. "First, this vial. We need to know what's in it. Officially going to the police is risky. Jonas is a wealthy, respected man. They might drag their feet, start an investigation that would alert him. He would cover his tracks, and you would be in even more danger. We need to be smarter." She began writing on the notepad. "I have a friend. A cousin, actually. Dr. Eris Thorne. He runs a private toxicology lab. He's discreet, and he owes me a favor that goes back 30 years. He will test this for us, quickly and quietly. No official record." She ripped the page from the pad and handed it to Olivia. On it was a name, an address for a lab in a neighboring city, and a phone number. "Call him. Tell him Elin Hale sent you and that it's a matter of life and death. He'll understand." Olivia took the paper, her hope, fragile but real, beginning to bloom in the wasteland of her fear. She wasn't alone anymore. She had an ally. A fierce, intelligent ally who was just as invested in bringing Jonas down as she was. What else? Olivia asked, her mind starting to work strategically for the first time. What else do we need? Everything, Elin said grimly. We need to build a case so airtight that when we finally go to the authorities, they will have no choice but to act immediately. Go back to that chest. Photograph every single document. The bank statements, the marriage and death certificates, the photos of Clara. Create a digital file. Email it to me, and keep a copy on a flash drive that you hide somewhere he will never look. She paced the room, her mind clearly working several steps ahead. You must go back to that loft. You must continue to play the part. Be the sick, docile wife. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done, but your life depends on it. If he suspects for a second that you know, he will accelerate his timeline. He will not hesitate to silence you permanently. The thought made Olivia's blood run cold, but Elin's certainty was contagious. When you are with him, be a sponge. Absorb everything. Every lie, every manipulation. Every time he insists you eat something, he's prepared. Write it all down. Dates, times, details. We are establishing a pattern of behavior. Coercive control. Medical abuse. Elin stopped pacing and looked at Olivia, her expression a mixture of grim determination and something that looked almost like pride. He thinks you are weak. He thinks he has broken you. That is our greatest advantage. He will not see you coming. Olivia nodded, feeling a surge of strength she hadn't felt in months. The fog had been a chemical prison, but the truth, as terrifying as it was setting her free. There's one more thing, Elin said, her voice dropping. When Clara died, Jonas inherited everything. Her family's money. Her life insurance policy. It was a substantial amount. Enough to start fresh, invest in his career, build his perfect world. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Has he talked to you about your life insurance policy recently? Olivia's mind flashed back a few months. Jonas, sitting with her at the kitchen island, spreading papers before her. Liv, darling, with my new projects we should probably increase our coverage. It's just being responsible. She had signed the papers without a second thought. Another task delegated to her capable, loving husband. She told Elin this, and the old woman's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. That bastard, she hissed. He's running the same play move for move. Olivia stood up, feeling a new resolve solidify within her. He won't win this time. No, Elin agreed, placing a firm, bony hand on Olivia's shoulder. He won't. For Clara. And for you. Now go. Get that vial to Eris. And then go home, and be the best actress of your life. I will be your audience, and I will be ready. Call me the second you have the results. We'll plan our next move then. As Olivia walked back to her car, the world felt different. The quaint houses and quiet streets no longer seemed merely peaceful. They seemed like a bastion of sanity in a world where monsters wore handsome suits and whispered loving lies. She had arrived at Elin's door a terrified victim. She was leaving as a conspirator, an avenger. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was intertwined with something else, something powerful. A cold, clear, righteous anger. The address Elin had given her led not to a gleaming medical facility or a downtown office building, but to a nondescript industrial park on the city's outskirts. It was a landscape of beige corrugated metal, chain-link fences, and anonymous numbered doors. The kind of place that existed to be forgotten, where businesses with names like Apex Logistics and Synergy Solutions conducted their inscrutable work. It was the perfect place for a secret. Olivia found Unit 12B and parked her car between a windowless van and a large waste container. She sat for a moment, the engine humming silently, the vial a cold weight in her purse. The adrenaline that had propelled her from Elin's house had now cooled into a low, simmering dread. This was the point of no return. The knowledge she was about to gain would either confirm she was living in a nightmare or, far less likely, that she was losing her mind. She wasn't sure which was worse. She killed the engine and the silence in the car became absolute. Her own breathing sounded loud, ragged. She forced herself to take a deep, slow breath, then another. Think like him, she told herself. Calm. Methodical. Detached. She had to be a scientist in her own right, collecting data, observing, analyzing. Emotion was a luxury she could no longer afford. She got out of the car, the industrial park's sterile quiet pressing in on her. A faded sign on the door of Unit 12B read, Thorn Analytical, the lettering peeling at the edges. It looked more like a defunct auto parts supplier than a state-of-the-art toxicology lab. She pushed the door open and stepped into a small, cluttered reception area that smelled of stale coffee and ozone. A bored-looking woman sat behind a plexiglass divider, scrolling through her phone. "I'm here to see Dr. Thorne," Olivia said, her voice steadier than she expected. "My name is Olivia Reed. Elin Hale sent me." The woman barely looked up. "He's in the back. Go on through." She gestured vaguely toward a heavy door behind her. Olivia pushed through the door and found herself in a different world. The cluttered chaos of the front office gave way to a vast, gleaming white laboratory. It was a space of stainless steel, humming machinery, and the clean antiseptic smell of alcohol. Banks of complex equipment lined the walls, their screens displaying shifting graphs and columns of data. In the center of it all stood a man in a white lab coat, his back to her, peering intently into a microscope. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 60s, with a fringe of white hair and a slight stoop. He didn't seem to have heard her come in. "Dr. Thorne," she said softly. He started, turning around. He had a weary, intelligent face, with deep-set eyes behind thick glasses. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and professional curiosity. "Yes. Can I help you? I'm Olivia. Elin Hale sent me." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a faint sigh, as if bracing himself for something complicated. "Ah yes. Elin. Of course." He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "My cousin has a flair for the dramatic. What is it this time? A suspicious mold on her prize-winning roses? A neighbor's dog she suspects of chemical warfare against her petunias?" His tone was jaded, dismissive, and for a heart-stopping moment, Olivia feared she had made a terrible mistake, that he wouldn't take her seriously. "It's not about her," Olivia said, her voice low and firm. She stepped forward and reached into her purse. "It's about this." She placed the silk-wrapped vial on a clean steel countertop between them. Dr. Thorne's gaze fell to the small object. His cynical demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by the focused intensity of a professional. He picked up the vial carefully, not with his bare hands, but with a pair of tweezers. He held it up to the bright laboratory light, examining the clear liquid inside. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice now devoid of any levity. "From my husband's private effects," she said. "He's been adding it to my food. He told me it was a peptide complex to help with fatigue." Dr. Thorne didn't react, his face a mask of clinical detachment. He carried the vial over to a complex machine with a series of robotic arms and input modules. A gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, Olivia guessed from her limited knowledge. "And why do you believe it's not?" he asked, his back still to her as he prepared a sample. "Because I found his search history. I found a death certificate for his first wife, who died from symptoms identical to mine. I found his secret bank accounts." The words came out flat, stripped of emotion. A simple recitation of facts. Dr. Thorne stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully. He truly looked at her then, taking in her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands that she couldn't quite control. He saw past the well-dressed woman from the city and saw the terror she was trying to contain. His expression softened with a flicker of something human, pity perhaps, or grim understanding. "I see," he said quietly. "This is not about roses." He motioned to a stool. "Sit. This will take a little while." The next hour was one of the longest of Olivia's life. Dr. Thorne worked in silence, a master in his element. He moved with an economy of motion, his hands steady and sure as he operated the machinery. Olivia sat on the stool, watching, feeling utterly useless. The humming and beeping of the equipment was the only sound, a mechanical heartbeat counting down to a verdict that would define the rest of her life. To distract herself from the rising panic, she focused on the details of the lab. The neat rows of labeled beakers. The complex charts on the walls depicting molecular structures. The absolute, almost religious, devotion to order and precision. It was a world built on facts, on evidence, on empirical truth. It was the antithesis of the gaslit, subjective reality she had been living in. Here there were answers. Here, a lie could be exposed for what it was. A specific combination of molecules with a predictable effect. Finally, Dr. Thorne turned away from a monitor, his face grim. He took a deep breath and walked over to her, pulling up another stool. "Well," he began, his voice low. "The good news is, it's not tetrodotoxin or any of the more common, fast-acting neurotoxins your husband was searching for. If it were, you and I would not be having this conversation." A tiny, hysterical bubble of relief rose in Olivia's chest, only to be immediately crushed by his next words. "The bad news," he continued, looking her directly in the eye, "is that what's in this vial is, in many ways, far more insidious. It's not designed to kill quickly. It's designed to dismantle." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This is a highly sophisticated, custom-synthesized psychoactive agent. It's a derivative of the benzodiazepine family, but it's been modified. Cunningly so. It's engineered to be difficult to detect in standard blood or urine tests. You'd need a specialized panel, and you'd have to know exactly what you were looking for." He saw the confusion on her face and simplified. "Think of it as a targeted weapon. It doesn't just sedate the body. It specifically targets the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain responsible for executive function, willpower, decision-making, short-term memory, emotional regulation. This substance systematically shuts those functions down." The clinical description landed like a physical blow. It was a perfect, scientific explanation for her entire ordeal. The brain fog, the memory lapses, the apathy, the inability to fight back or even question what was happening to her. He hadn't just been making her sick. He had been chemically disabling her personality, her very self. "It induces a state of extreme suggestibility and compliance," Dr. Thorne went on, his voice a grim monotone. "The victim becomes passive, apathetic. They lose the will to resist. It's a form of chemical gaslighting. It makes you believe you really are losing your mind, that you are weak and incapable, while the agent itself is what's causing the symptoms." He called them peptides," she whispered. "There are no peptides in this vial," Dr. Thorne said flatly. "This is a poison of the mind. On the black market, compounds like this have a street name. They're sometimes called submissant. Submissin. The name was obscene, a perfect, ugly label for its purpose. To create submission. To turn a person into a puppet. The clinical horror of it all was overwhelming. This was the work of a monster who was not just a killer, but a meticulous, patient architect of psychological destruction. Can it be lethal?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Absolutely," he confirmed. "Administered consistently over a long period, it causes progressive neurological damage. The central nervous system begins to break down. Eventually, it would lead to catastrophic organ failure. Most likely cardiac arrest. A heart attack that would look, to any standard autopsy, like the result of an undiagnosed congenital condition, especially in someone already presenting with unexplained neurological symptoms." It was Clara's cause of death, spelled out in the cold language of toxicology. He had perfected his method. He had found the perfect weapon, a chemical ghost that killed without leaving a clear trace. Dr. Thorne printed out a full report from his computer, a multi-page document filled with chemical formulas and spectral analysis data. He handed it to her. "This is your proof," he said. "This is undeniable scientific fact. This report, along with your other evidence, is a loaded gun. But be very, very careful how you aim it." He looked at her, his earlier weariness replaced by a grave, paternal concern. "This man, your husband, he is not just a common criminal. He is intelligent, methodical, and clearly without conscience. He is more dangerous than a rabid dog. Do not underestimate him for a second." Olivia folded the report and put it in her purse, next to the photos on her phone. It felt like a slab of lead. It was the truth she had sought, and it was heavier than she could have ever imagined. "Thank you, Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for believing me." "I believe in data, Mrs. Reed," he replied, though his eyes told a different story. And the data says you are in mortal danger. Go home. Be safe. And for God's sake, do not drink his smoothies. The drive back to the city was a blur. The setting sun painted the sky in lurid shades of orange and purple, a beautiful, violent sunset that felt like a reflection of her inner world. The knowledge she now possessed was a terrible burden. There was no ambiguity left, no room for doubt. She was married to a man who had murdered at least one woman before her, and was methodically preparing to murder her, too. As the skyline of the city rose to meet her, the glass and steel towers no longer looked beautiful or aspirational. They looked like teeth, like the bars of a cage. She was driving back to the lion's den, armed with nothing but the truth and a terrifying, half-formed plan. When she finally pulled into the underground garage of their building, her hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. She took the elevator up to the 27th floor. As she stepped out, she could hear the faint sound of classical music coming from under their door, box cello suites, something Jonas always put on when he was relaxing. He was home. She stood before the door for a long moment, gathering every ounce of her strength. She smoothed her hair, composed her face into a mask of weary tranquility, and practiced the slight, vacant look she knew he expected to see. The performance of her life was about to begin. She put her key in the lock and turned it. It was time to go home to her killer. The heavy door of the loft swung open with a soft, hydraulic sigh, a sound Olivia had once found reassuringly modern. Now it sounded like the opening of a vault. The mournful, elegant notes of box cello suite number 1 spilled into the hallway, a soundtrack of sophisticated melancholy. Jonas was in the main living area, standing with his back to her, silhouetted against the vast panoramic window. The city lights were just beginning to twinkle to life below, a sprawling galaxy of captured stars. He held a glass of red wine, swirling it gently, a solitary, pensive figure in his kingdom of glass and concrete. He turned as he heard the door close, and a slow, warm smile spread across his face. It was his performance smile, the one he used with clients and admiring strangers, but she had once believed it was reserved for her alone. "There you are, my love," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur that slid over her skin like a physical touch. "I was just starting to worry." He walked toward her, his movements fluid and graceful. He looked immaculate, having changed out of his work suit into tailored dark trousers and a soft, cashmere sweater. He looked like the picture of domestic tranquility, the perfect husband waiting for his wife. The contrast between his appearance and the monstrous truth she now carried was so profound it made her feel dizzy. I went for a long walk," she said, her voice a carefully constructed blend of weariness and apology. "The weather was so nice, I lost track of time. Ended up by the waterfront." It was a plausible lie. Plausible enough, she hoped. Jonas stopped in front of her, his smile not faltering, but his eyes, those stormy gray eyes, were conducting a forensic scan. He was searching for tells, for cracks in her facade. "A walk. That's good. The fresh air is good for you." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing against her skin. She had to fight every instinct in her body not to flinch. His touch felt like a spider's caress. "But you seem different. There's a color in your cheeks. Your eyes are clearer." It was a test. He was noting the absence of the drug's effects. She had been gone all day, had not consumed his carefully prepared lunch. The fog was lifting, and he, the meticulous scientist, was noticing the change in his subject. She forced a weak, tired smile. "I think it's just the exhaustion. It was a long walk. I feel completely drained." To sell the lie, she allowed her shoulders to slump, her eyelids to droop slightly. "I think I need to sit down." The tension in his posture eased. He accepted her explanation. He was still in control. "Of course, my love. Go rest on the sofa. I'll bring you a glass of water. No wine for you tonight. We need to keep your system clean." Clean, she thought with a surge of black humor as she walked to the sofa. "You mean pure, so your poisons can work more effectively." She sank into the low leather couch, her body screaming with a fatigue that was now bone-deep and genuine, born not of drugs but of sheer terror. He returned with a glass of water, watching her as she took a few sips. He sat on the edge of the sleek coffee table opposite her, leaning forward, his expression a perfect mask of loving concern. "I have a surprise for you, Olivia," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a wonderful secret. Her heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. She knew, with a chilling certainty, what was coming. "I was on the phone with the contractor today," he continued, his eyes gleaming with a strange, fervent light. "The final touches are complete. The systems are all online. It's ready." "Ready?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "The glass house," he said, the name spoken with a reverence usually reserved for a holy site. "Our mountain villa. The project I've been pouring my soul into for the past 2 years. It's finished, Liv. It's perfect." He reached out and took her hands in his. His were warm and dry. Hers were icy cold. "And I was thinking, this is exactly what you need. What we need. A complete escape. We'll go up this weekend. Just the two of us. The mountain air will be restorative. The absolute quiet will soothe your nerves. We can disconnect from everything. No phones, no internet, no distractions. Just you, me, and the sky." Every word was a perfectly polished stone, laid in place to build the structure of her doom. No phones, no internet. No way to call for help. No distractions. No witnesses. Absolute quiet. No one to hear her scream. Restorative mountain air. The perfect alibi for a tragic accident, a fall during a scenic hike. This was it. The invitation to her own execution. The culmination of his meticulous, patient planning. She looked into his handsome, earnest face, into the eyes of the man who had shared her bed and her life, and saw nothing but a cold, calculating void. The monster was not hiding anymore. It was looking right at her, smiling. She had to give him the answer he wanted to hear. Her survival depended on walking willingly into his trap. "Oh, Jonas," she breathed, forcing a look of fragile, hopeful wonder onto her face. "A surprise? For me?" She squeezed his hands, injecting a tremor of excitement into her own. That sounds wonderful. Truly." The relief that washed over his face was subtle but unmistakable. The final piece of his plan had clicked into place. His subject was compliant. The experiment could proceed to its final stage. "I knew you'd love the idea," he said, his smile widening. "I've already taken care of everything. I'll pack the car tomorrow. We can leave Friday, right after you finish work. I'll come pick you up." "You think of everything," she said, her voice a soft, admiring whisper. Inside, her mind was racing cold and clear. Friday. That gives me 2 days. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to turn his trap back on him. "Only when it comes to you," he said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. The gesture was meant to be tender, but it felt like a brand, a claim of ownership. He stood up, beaming, suddenly full of energy. "This calls for a celebration. I'm going to make us a special dinner tonight. My signature risotto with wild mushrooms. It's been too long." Her stomach twisted into a tight, nauseous knot. Another meal. Another dose. He was probably planning to increase the dosage now, to make sure she was perfectly docile and manageable for their trip. "That sounds lovely," she said, her voice faint. "But Jonas, I'm so tired. The walk. I don't think I could eat a heavy meal. Maybe just some toast." It was a risk, refusing his food. She watched his face carefully. For a split second, a flicker of annoyance, of frustration, crossed his features. It was the look of a scientist whose experiment is being tampered with. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his mask of infinite patience. "Of course, my love. Whatever you want," he said smoothly. "Toast it is. Your health is the most important thing. We need you strong for the mountains." He went to the kitchen, and Olivia let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She had successfully navigated another test. She had to be careful, to balance her compliance with just enough perceived fragility to make her avoidance of his food seem like a symptom of her illness, not an act of defiance. While he was busy in the kitchen, she discreetly pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing a coded message to Elin. "The architect has unveiled his new project. A weekend retreat. This Friday. Details to follow. The performance is underway." She hit send, then quickly deleted the message from her sent folder. Jonas returned with a plate of lightly buttered toast and a glass of milk. To keep your strength up, he said, placing it before her. She ate it under his watchful eye, every bite feeling like a betrayal of her own body. Was the bread safe? The butter? The milk? The paranoia was a living thing now, a constant companion. Later that evening, as they prepared for bed, he was in an unusually buoyant mood. He talked animatedly about the glass house, describing its features with an almost feverish passion. He spoke of the cantilevered terrace that hung over the valley, the geothermal heating system, the way the light would move through the space at different times of day. He was an artist describing his masterpiece. A masterpiece that required a human sacrifice to be complete. You will love it, Liv, he said, turning to her as they lay in bed. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her. It's a place where you can finally be at peace. A place where all the noise of the world fades away, and all that's left is what's real. He leaned down and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that was meant to be passionate but felt chillingly predatory. She forced herself to respond, to play the part of the loving, grateful wife, while her mind screamed. When he finally rolled over and his breathing settled into the steady rhythm of sleep, Olivia lay awake, staring into the darkness. The city lights cast shifting patterns on the ceiling. The trap had been set. The invitation had been accepted. She was walking into the heart of the storm. But she would not be walking in defenseless. She had the toxicology report. She had the evidence from the chest. And she had Elin. She thought of the sharp-eyed old woman, of her fierce, protective anger. She was not alone. She closed her eyes and began to plan. She thought about the glass house as Jonas had described it. Isolated. High-tech. A place of surfaces and reflections. A place where nothing could be hidden. He thought that would be his advantage. She would make it hers. He was the architect, the master planner who designed flawless structures. But she was a designer too. She designed systems of communication, of perception. She could build a trap of her own, one made not of glass and steel, but of information, timing, and his own monstrous ego. He thought he was taking her to the mountains to die. But Olivia was going to the glass house to bring a monster to justice. The performance had begun, and she would not let the curtain fall until the final, bloody act was played out. Thursday dawned gray and oppressive, the sky a seamless sheet of bruised purple that mirrored the dread in Olivia's soul. The ticking clock had become a physical presence in the loft, each second a hammer blow counting down to Friday evening. She had less than 36 hours. She woke before Jonas, her mind clicking into gear instantly, cold and sharp. The vestiges of the chemical fog were gone, burned away by the fires of adrenaline and terror. In its place was a stark, crystalline clarity. She saw the path ahead of her, a treacherous tightrope walk over a chasm, and knew that a single misstep would mean a fatal fall. The morning ritual began as always. Jonas, ever the attentive caregiver, emerged from the kitchen with her smoothie. Today it was a vibrant, cheerful pink, from raspberries and beets. It looked deceptively healthy, utterly benign. I thought we'd try something with more antioxidants today, he said, his voice smooth as silk as he placed the glass on her bedside table. Good for circulation. Especially with the altitude change this weekend. Olivia sat up, propping pillows behind her back. She had rehearsed this moment in her head all night. She couldn't refuse outright again. It would be too suspicious. She had to redirect. It looks wonderful, darling, she said, her voice husky with feigned sleepiness. She reached for the glass, then hesitated, her hand hovering in midair. She brought her fingers to her temple and winced. You know, my head is still pounding from that long walk yesterday. Dr. Evans said I should be careful with anything cold or sugary when I have a migraine coming on. Maybe just some warm water with lemon for now. She watched his face, her entire being focused on his reaction. She saw it again. The micro-expression, a fleeting tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw. It was the frustration of a meticulous planner, whose meticulous plans were being subtly, annoyingly altered. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his familiar mask of deep concern. Of course, my love. Anything you need, he said, his tone flawless. I'll get it for you right away. We can't have you feeling unwell for our big trip. He took the smoothie away. Olivia let out a silent breath. One more small victory. One more dose of submission avoided. She knew, however, that his patience was not infinite. He needed her weak and compliant for the glass house. If his oral administration route kept failing, he might be forced to escalate his methods sooner than planned. The image of the syringe in the velvet box flashed in her mind. The clock was ticking faster than she thought. As soon as Jonas left for work, showering her with tender kisses and reminders to rest and save her energy, Olivia's own plan clicked into motion. Her first act was not one of panic, but of quiet, cold strategy. She went to her closet, to a shoebox on the top shelf where she kept old sentimental items. From it, she took out a bundle of cash she'd been saving for a surprise gift for him months ago, a vintage watch he'd admired. The irony was a bitter pill. She had been saving to celebrate him. Now she would use it to destroy him. Her first stop was an anonymous electronics store in a strip mall miles from their neighborhood. It was a cavernous, soulless place, and she moved through the aisles feeling like a ghost, a spy in the mundane world of families buying televisions and teenagers looking at video games. She paid cash for 3 items. First, a cheap, prepaid burner phone. Untraceable. Second, a miniature audio recorder, no bigger than her thumb, advertised for recording lectures. It had a 24-hour battery life and a sensitive microphone. Third, a tiny GPS tracker, marketed for locating lost keys or pets. It was magnetic and transmitted a continuous signal to a secure app she could install on the burner phone. Back in her car, she unwrapped her new arsenal. The small, cold, plastic objects felt impossibly heavy in her hands. They were the tools of her survival. She programmed Elon's number into the burner phone under the name Gallery. She then sent her first message. Acquired the necessary supplies. Awaiting instructions. Elon's reply came within a minute. Good girl. The lab report is our foundation, but we need to build the walls. We need proof of motive. The insurance policy, Olivia. You have to find it. Photograph every page. It's the why that will hang him. The thought of going back into his office, of sifting through his meticulously organized files, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. It was the riskiest part of the plan so far. But Elon was right. The poisoning was the how. The insurance money was the why. She needed both. Elon's next message appeared. One more thing. Your signal. When you are in danger, when he is making his final move, you will text me this exact phrase. The showing was a great success. The collection is sold. Got it. Not a word more, not a word less. The moment I receive that, I call the police and give them the location. And Olivia, we need a failsafe. If I do not hear from you by 10 p.m. on Friday night, I'm making the call anyway. Understood? Understood. The failsafe, the dead man's switch, was both terrifying and comforting. It meant there was a point of no return for him, too. Her next task was the most dangerous. She drove back to the loft, her stomach in knots. The building felt less like a home now and more like an enemy fortress she had to infiltrate. She let herself in, the silence amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. His office was just as he had left it. She went straight to the sleek, modern filing cabinet. It wasn't locked. Of course not. Jonas's security wasn't in locks. It was in order and intimidation. He never imagined she would dare to look. His files were organized with an almost psychopathic precision. Alphabetical, color-coded folders. Contracts, invoices, project blueprints, taxes. She started with I for insurance. Her hands, slick with sweat, made the smooth folders difficult to grip. She found the folder. Inside were policies for the loft, for his car, for his professional liability. And at the back, a thick, glossy folder from a premium life insurance company. She pulled it out, her breath catching in her throat. She opened it. There they were, 2 policies, bound together. The first was on his life, with her as the beneficiary. $1 million. Standard. The second was on her life. Beneficiary, Jonas Hale. The amount made her gasp. $2 million. She scanned the documents, her eyes flying across the legal jargon. She found the date the policy was issued. 2 years ago, just after they were married. And then she saw the rider, the addendum. It was dated 6 months ago, right when her brain fog had become debilitating. It was an amendment to increase the death benefit from 1 million to 2. It included a clause for an additional payout in the case of accidental death. Her signature was at the bottom, a shaky, uncertain scrawl she vaguely remembered making on a day when she could barely focus her eyes. He must have told her it was a routine update. This was it. The receipt for her life. The cold, contractual proof of his motive. She laid the documents out on his desk, pulling out her phone. The camera's click sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. She photographed every single page, every clause, every signature. The paper rustled under her trembling hands, the sound magnified by her terror. What if he came home? What if he'd forgotten something? As if summoned by her fear, she heard a sound from the hallway. The distinct, electronic ding of the private elevator arriving at their floor. Panic, stark and absolute, seized her. Her heart leaped into her throat. He was home. It was only 2 in the afternoon. He was never home at this time. She scrambled, a flurry of desperate motion. The papers. She shoved the insurance policy back into the folder, her fumbling fingers struggling with the glossy pages. She slammed the folder back into the filing cabinet. Was it in the right place? Was it perfectly aligned with the others? She couldn't remember. She shoved the drawer closed. It made a loud, resonant thump. The key was turning in the lock. She looked around wildly. The desk. She had laid the papers on the desk. Had she left an indentation? A smudge? She wiped the surface frantically with the sleeve of her sweater just as the front door opened. Jonas stepped inside, holding a portfolio tube. He stopped dead in the entryway, seeing her standing in his office, his eyes narrowing. "Olivia," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "What are you doing in here?" She froze, her mind a screaming white void. Think. Act. Lie. "Oh, Jonas," she said, forcing a nervous, fluttery laugh. She pressed a hand to her chest, feigning surprise. "You scared me. I didn't expect you home so early." "The meeting at the waterfront site finished ahead of schedule," he said, his eyes not leaving hers. They were sharp, analytical, missing nothing. "I asked what you were doing." I was just looking for a book," she improvised, gesturing vaguely at the bookshelf. "Elon mentioned an old architectural theorist, and I thought you might have one of his works. I felt a sudden burst of energy and thought I'd try to engage my brain." She let her voice trail off, trying to look hopeful and a little pathetic. He walked slowly into the office, placing his portfolio on the desk, the very desk she had just wiped down. He didn't look at the bookshelf. He looked at the filing cabinet. He looked at her. "You look flushed," he observed, his voice still quiet, still probing. "Are you feeling all right? You're not overexerting yourself, are you?" "No, I think I just stood up too quickly," she stammered. "A little dizzy spell. It passes." She leaned against the doorframe, playing the part of the fragile patient to perfection. He studied her for a moment longer, a long, agonizing silence where she was certain he could hear her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She could see the calculations behind his eyes. Did her story hold up? Did she look like a woman looking for a book, or a woman who had just been caught? Finally, to her infinite relief, he seemed to accept it. His posture relaxed, and his face softened back into its mask of concern. "You need to be more careful, my love," he said, his tone gently chiding. "No more sudden movements. Why don't you go lie down? I'll make us some tea, a special calming blend I picked up." "Yes," she whispered, grateful for the excuse to escape his scrutiny. "I think I will." She practically fled from the office, her legs unsteady beneath her. She had gotten away with it. But it was too close. Far too close. His early return was a stark reminder that she was not in control of the timeline. He was unpredictable. One more mistake, one more slip-up, and he would know. She collapsed onto the bed, her body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. She had the evidence. She had the tools. She had the plan. But now she knew, with terrifying certainty, that she was living on borrowed time, and that the architect of her demise was watching her every move. Friday couldn't come soon enough, and she feared it more than anything in the world. The drive to the mountains was a surreal, 4-hour exercise in sustained tension. Olivia sat in the passenger seat of Jonas's Porsche, a silent, sleek machine that devoured the highway miles with predatory grace. She felt like a prisoner on her way to a final, undisclosed location. Beside her, Jonas was the picture of relaxed, cheerful anticipation. He had curated a playlist for the drive. A mix of ambient electronic music and soaring indie rock that was meant to be uplifting but felt, to Olivia, like the soundtrack to a stylish horror film. He kept up a steady stream of light conversation, pointing out landmarks, commenting on the changing scenery as the urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, and then to the jagged, imposing peaks of the mountains. He spoke of the fresh air, the scent of pine, the liberating feeling of leaving the city behind. He was a master performer, playing the role of the excited husband whisking his wife away for a romantic weekend. He reached over several times to squeeze her hand, his touch warm and possessive. Each time, she had to force herself not to recoil, to offer a weak but appreciative smile in return. "You're very quiet, my love," he observed as they began their ascent on a winding mountain road. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just tired," she murmured, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window. "It's been a long week. I'm just looking forward to resting." "You'll have all the rest in the world," he said, and the words, meant to be soothing, hung in the air with a chilling, prophetic weight. She had her own secret preparations for the trip. The burner phone was tucked into the lining of her purse. The tiny audio recorder was safely stowed in the inner pocket of her jacket, ready to be activated. The GPS tracker, small and magnetic, was the riskiest piece. Before they left, feigning a need to grab a forgotten scarf from her car, she had managed to affix it to the underside of the Porsche's rear bumper. It was a desperate, clumsy maneuver, her heart pounding as she fumbled with the device in the dim light of the garage, terrified he would come looking for her. But she had done it. Her digital breadcrumb trail was active. Elon was watching. The final approach to the glass house was a narrow, unpaved road that snaked through a dense forest of pine and aspen. The road was barely wide enough for one car, with a steep, unforgiving drop on one side. Civilization fell away completely. There were no other houses, no signs of life, only the immense, silent trees and the deepening twilight. The isolation was absolute. It was a perfect place to disappear. And then they rounded a final bend, and she saw it. The glass house was not so much a house as it was a statement. It was a breathtaking, terrifying piece of architecture. A razor-sharp rectangle of glass and black steel. It was cantilevered dramatically over the edge of a cliff, seeming to float in midair above a dizzying drop into the valley below. 3 of its 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a stunning, uninterrupted 180-degree view of the mountain range. It was a masterpiece of modernist design, a structure that sought to dissolve the barrier between inside and out. It was also the most exposed, vulnerable place Olivia had ever seen. There was nowhere to hide. "Well," Jonas said, stopping the car at the entrance. His voice was thick with pride, the voice of a creator unveiling his magnum opus. "What do you think?" "It's incredible, Jonas," she said, and she wasn't entirely lying. It was an incredible feat of engineering. It was also the most elegant, beautiful prison she could have imagined. A glass cage poised on the edge of the void. "I told you it was perfect," he said, his face alight with a triumphant, almost manic energy. "Complete privacy. No distractions. Just us and the universe." He began unloading their bags with an efficient, joyful vigor. Olivia got out of the car, the thin mountain air cold and sharp in her lungs. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. She felt small and utterly alone, a tiny, fragile figure dwarfed by the immense, indifferent landscape. He led her inside. The interior was as stark and minimalist as their loft, but amplified. The floors were polished black slate. The sparse furniture was all low profile, designed not to interrupt the view. A single large, open-plan room contained a living area, a state-of-the-art kitchen island, and a sleeping area with a bed that seemed to float in the center of the space. The only solid wall, at the back of the house, contained a fireplace and doorways leading to a bathroom and a storage closet. Every other direction was a sheer wall of glass. "The smart glass panels can be opaqued with the touch of a button," Jonas explained, tapping a control panel on the wall. For privacy. But why would we want to block out a view like this? He grinned. It feels like you're living in the sky, doesn't it? It feels like I'm in a display case, she thought, while he continued to bring in their gear. Coolers of food, bags of clothes, a case of expensive wine. Olivia took a moment to subtly survey her surroundings, her mind in tactical mode. She noted the heavy, solid-looking front door, the only conventional exit. The large, sliding glass doors that led out onto the cantilevered terrace. The fireplace with its set of heavy iron tools, a poker, tongs, a shovel. Potential weapons. She saw the kitchen island, with its block of professional-grade knives. More potential weapons. She was cataloging the space not as a home, but as a battlefield. Jonas seemed to be in his element, his mood buoyant, almost giddy. He was a king in his castle, the master of his domain. He unpacked a portable speaker and soon the spare, minimalist space was filled with the complex, cerebral sounds of a modern jazz quartet. He opened a bottle of wine, a deep, dark red, and poured 2 glasses. A toast, he said, handing her a glass. To the glass house. And to new beginnings. She raised her glass, her hand steady. The phrase new beginnings echoed in her memory. The same word she'd seen him use years ago in online posts with his first wife, Clara. It was his code. His euphemism for starting over after a successful erasure. To new beginnings, she echoed, her voice a soft murmur. She touched her glass to his and pretended to take a sip, letting the wine wet her lips but not swallowing. The bitter, tannic taste felt appropriate. Now, he said, rubbing his hands together with theatrical enthusiasm. You relax. Unwind. Take it all in. I am going to prepare a meal worthy of this occasion. You were always the most beautiful of my projects, he continued, his voice a low monologue. So much potential. So much talent. It's a shame it had to end. But you were becoming complicated. Just like Clara. She got curious too. Started asking questions. Undermining the foundation. You can't have a perfect structure with a flawed foundation. It has to be demolished and rebuilt. The confession, whispered into the ear of a woman he believed couldn't hear him, was a prosecutor's dream. It was being captured, every damning word. He was admitting to the pattern. He was admitting to the murder of his first wife. He took a sip of his champagne. But this time the demolition will be flawless. No messy neurological degenerations. Just a tragic, simple accident. A slip on a treacherous mountain path, during a romantic walk. So sad. The brilliant architect loses another love to the cruelty of fate. People will weep. They will send flowers. And I will collect the insurance, mourn for a respectable period, and then a new beginning. He stood up. The performance was over. The practical work was about to begin. She heard him move around the small, open-plan house. The scrape of a drawer opening in the kitchen island. The clink of glass on glass. He was preparing his final tools. Through her barely parted eyelids she watched him, a shadowy figure moving in the dim light from the fireplace. He laid out a small, dark cloth on the kitchen counter. Onto it, he placed the syringe she had seen in the chest. Then a new vial, this one filled with a liquid that was slightly viscous, almost oily. This was not the submission. This was something else. Something final. He drew the liquid into the syringe with a practiced, steady hand, tapping the barrel to dislodge any air bubbles. A professional. He then went to the closet and retrieved a length of thick, nylon rope and a roll of heavy-duty duct tape. He placed them on the floor near the bed. He was planning to restrain her. Why? If she was unconscious, why would he need restraints? The horrifying answer came to her at once. He wanted to make sure that if she, by some miracle, started to wake up during the process, she would be completely helpless. He was leaving nothing to chance. He picked up the loaded syringe. This was it. The moment she had been playing towards, the precipice she had been forced to walk. He approached the bed. She could feel his presence, his shadow falling over her. She could almost feel the coldness emanating from him, the absolute absence of humanity. He knelt beside the bed, the syringe held delicately in his fingers. He gently pushed back the sleeve of her sweater, exposing the pale skin of her forearm. His touch was impersonal, like a doctor preparing a patient for a routine blood draw. "Goodbye, Olivia," he whispered, his voice a flat, unemotional finality. "You were a masterpiece. But all art is temporary." He positioned the needle against her skin. The tiny, sharp prick of it was a jolt of pure, white-hot reality. It was her cue. The needle was a tiny, cold star of pain against her skin. It was the final, irrevocable signal, the starting gun for the rest of her life. In the split second between the needle's touch and the plunge of the piston, Olivia's world, which had been a slow-motion tableau of terror, exploded into violent, desperate action. She did not scream. A scream was a sound of a victim. Instead, a low, guttural roar tore from her throat as her eyes snapped open, locking onto his. For a heartbeat, Jonas froze. His handsome face, placid and controlled just a moment before, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His brain, so methodical and certain, could not process the data. The subject was supposed to be sedated, unconscious, compliant. This sudden feral eruption of life, was not in the plan. That single heartbeat of his stunned inaction was all the advantage she needed. Her hand, which had been lying limply at her side, shot out like a viper, clamping around his wrist. Her grip was not the weak, trembling grasp of the woman he thought he had created. It was a desperate, vice-like clamp, fueled by a tidal wave of adrenaline. His surprise turned to a snarl of disbelief as he tried to push the syringe home. But her grip held. With her other hand she shoved hard against his shoulder. The unexpected force, combined with his awkward, kneeling position, sent him stumbling backward. He lost his balance, his arms flailing. The syringe, his instrument of quiet, clinical death, flew from his grasp. It arced through the dim, firelit air, a silver glint of murderous intent, before shattering against the hard slate floor with a sharp, final crack. The clear, oily liquid, his perfect killing tool, pooled uselessly on the dark stone. "What the hell?" he hissed, scrambling to his feet. The mask of the grieving husband, the concerned caregiver, the triumphant artist, all of it was gone, burned away. What was left was raw, primal, and terrifyingly real. It was the predator, unmasked. "How are you awake? You drank the wine. You ate the duck. You should be gone." Olivia rolled off the bed, landing on her feet with a fluid agility that surprised even herself. She backed away from him, putting space between them, her eyes never leaving his. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a white-hot, righteous fury. "I know, Jonas," she said, her voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. The audio recorder in her pocket was her silent witness. "I know everything." He stared at her, his mind visibly racing, trying to recalibrate, to understand the catastrophic failure of his plan. "Know what? You're delirious. The medication, it's making you hallucinate." He was already trying to spin a new narrative, to build a new lie. "Stop," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that made him pause. "The performance is over. I know about Clara. I know you murdered her. I know you've been poisoning me for months with something you call submissin. I know about the life insurance. All of it." The name Clara hit him like a physical blow. His face, for a second, went slack with a different kind of shock. Not the shock of a failed experiment, but the shock of a ghost being summoned. He had erased Clara, buried her under years of lies and a death certificate full of medical jargon. To hear her name spoken aloud in this place, at this moment, was to see his carefully constructed reality crumble. But the shock quickly hardened into something else. A cold, appraising calculation. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. "Clever girl," he said, and the words were laced with a chilling, almost admiring condescension. He began to circle her slowly, moving with a predator's grace, cutting off her path to the front door. "I underestimated you. Clara was never this resourceful. She just cried and made accusations. It was messy." The casual, almost bored admission of his first wife's murder was more terrifying than any threat. He was no longer denying it. He probably assumed it didn't matter. She was a dead woman walking. Her knowledge would die with her in this glass tomb. "How long?" he asked, his curiosity seeming genuine academic. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," she said, backing away as he advanced, keeping the low-slung sofa between them. Long enough to gather proof. Long enough to make sure that when my body is found at the bottom of that cliff, the police won't be writing it off as a tragic accident. He laughed. It was not a sound of humor. It was a dry, rasping sound, utterly devoid of warmth. Proof? Oh, Olivia. My sweet, naive Olivia. Who is going to believe you? A woman with a documented history of mental instability, of fatigue and confusion? My loving, concerned testimony about your deteriorating state will be far more compelling than any paranoid ramblings you might have scribbled down. He was good. He had built his alibi for months, using her drugged state as the foundation. He had created the perfect narrative of a woman losing her mind. It's more than ramblings, she shot back. It's a toxicology report from a private lab. It's copies of your secret bank accounts. It's a copy of Clara's death certificate next to my $2 million life insurance policy. And Jonas, she said, her voice dropping, it's this. She subtly tapped the pocket of her jacket where the recorder was running. It's your full confession. His circling stopped. His eyes narrowed, focusing on her jacket. The confidence wavered just for a second. The mention of a toxicology report, of specific evidence, had struck a nerve. He was a man who believed in data, and she was telling him she had data of her own. You're bluffing, he snarled, but there was a new edge of uncertainty in his voice. Am I? She asked. Did you really think I would walk into your masterpiece, your perfect glass house, without an escape plan of my own? That was when the change happened. The calculating predator, the condescending intellectual, vanished. What remained was pure, brutal rage. The rage of a narcissist whose perfect creation had been defied, whose intellectual superiority had been challenged. His face contorted, and with a guttural roar, he lunged, vaulting over the back of the sofa with an explosive athleticism she had never known he possessed. She scrambled backward, barely dodging his grasping hands. She kicked a minimalist floor lamp into his path, and he stumbled, giving her a precious second. She didn't run for the front door. He was blocking it. She ran for the kitchen. For the knives. You can't run forever, Olivia, he shouted, his voice echoing in the glass-walled space. This house is miles from anywhere. Even if you get outside, the forest will kill you before I do. It was in that moment, as he stared at her with eyes full of disbelief and hatred, that she finally reached for the burner phone in her pocket. Her fingers, trembling but sure, typed out the message she had memorized. The showing was a great success. The collection is sold. She hit send. It was done. Help was coming. Now all she had to do was survive until it arrived. The isolation he had so carefully engineered was now his primary weapon. She reached the kitchen island, her hand closing around the cold, heavy handle of a large chef's knife. The weight of it was both terrifying and reassuring. She turned to face him, holding the knife out in front of her, her stance clumsy but determined. He stopped, seeing the blade in her hand. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He calmly walked to the magnetic strip on the wall and selected a long, slender-boning knife. He held it with an easy, practiced familiarity that made her blood run cold. Now we're getting somewhere, he said, his voice dropping to an eerie calm. This is so much more primal than a simple injection. More honest. But I should warn you, my love, I have considerably more experience with this sort of thing than you do. The implicit threat, the hint of other, messier encounters in his past, was terrifying. But she wasn't planning on fighting him. She was buying time. She was keeping him talking. Like it was for Clara, she demanded, her voice rising, trying to keep him engaged, to get more onto the recording. Was it primal for her too? Or did you just hold her down while she was too weak to fight back? The mention of Clara's name again seemed to fuel his rage. Clara got what she deserved, he spat, taking a step toward her. She was a liability. She started snooping, talking to her family, making wild accusations. She threatened to ruin everything I had built. So you killed her, Olivia stated, a cold, hard fact. To shut her up. I killed her because she was a flaw in the design, he corrected, his voice filled with a chilling, righteous conviction. Just like you. You were perfect for a while, a beautiful addition. But you got too curious. You started looking in places you shouldn't have. And the insurance money, well, that was just a necessary bonus for the inconvenience of having to start over. It was all there. Motive. Premeditation. A confession to a prior murder. Everything Elin said they needed. Now, she just had to live long enough for it to matter. He lunged. It was not a wild, clumsy attack. It was precise, economical, deadly. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. She threw a heavy ceramic utensil holder at him. He deflected it with his forearm without breaking stride. The blade of his knife sliced through the air, aiming for her gut. She leaped backward, the tip of the knife catching the fabric of her sweater, tearing it. The cold steel grazed her skin, a line of fire. She cried out, more in shock than pain. His smile widened. He had drawn first blood. He lunged again, and this time she had nowhere to retreat. She was backed against the kitchen island. She brought her own knife up in a desperate, two-handed block. The clang of steel on steel rang through the house. The force of his blow jarred her to the bone, and her knife was knocked from her grasp. It skittered across the slate floor, coming to rest near the fireplace. She was disarmed. He stood before her, the boning knife held loosely at his side, his chest heaving slightly. He was enjoying this. The terror in her eyes was a delicacy to him. "It's over, Olivia," he said softly. "No more games. No more talking." He raised the knife for the final killing blow. As his arm came up, Olivia did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed the heaviest object on the counter beside her, a solid block of Himalayan salt, and swung it with all her might, hitting his hand. There was a sickening crunch of bone. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony, and the knife dropped from his nerveless fingers. His hand was a mangled ruin. He stared at it in disbelief, his face white with shock and pain. The tables had turned in an instant. But he wasn't finished. With his good hand he grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back, his face a mask of pure hatred. "You bitch," he snarled, dragging her out from behind the island. "I'll kill you with my bare hands." He threw her to the floor. Her head hit the hard slate with a sickening thud, and the world exploded in a shower of white stars. For a moment, she was stunned, her vision swimming. He was on top of her in an instant, his weight pinning her down, his good hand closing around her throat. His fingers tightened, cutting off her air. Black spots danced in her vision. She clawed at his hand, but he was too strong. She was going to die here, on the floor of this glass house, choked to death by her husband. Her flailing hand hit something hard and metallic on the floor. The chef's knife. The one he had knocked from her grasp. Her fingers closed around the handle. With the last of her strength, the last of her air, she swung the heavy blade upward, not aiming, just striking with all the force she had left. The blade connected with his shoulder, sinking deep into the muscle and sinew just below his collarbone. He screamed again, a raw, animal sound of pure agony, and his grip on her throat loosened. He rolled off her, clutching at the knife handle protruding from his shoulder, his face a grotesque mask of shock and pain. Olivia scrambled away, crab-walking backward, gasping, sucking in ragged, painful breaths of air. She got to her feet, her body screaming in protest. They faced each other one last time across the spare, elegant room. The wounded predator and the survivor. The architect and the flaw in his design that had refused to be demolished. The message was sent. A tiny digital flare shot out from the glass cage into the vast, dark wilderness. Olivia stood with her back pressed against the cold, unyielding glass wall. The burner phone clutched in her hand like a holy relic. Her breath came in ragged, painful gulps, each one a victory against the crushing pressure of Jonas's fingers that still seemed ghosted around her throat. Her head throbbed where it had hit the slate floor, and a warm trickle of blood snaked down from her scalp, matting in her hair. Across the room, Jonas was a study in ruined perfection. He had staggered to his feet, one hand clamped around the handle of the chef's knife that was still embedded deep in his shoulder. Blood, dark and shockingly plentiful, seeped through his fingers, staining the pristine cashmere of his sweater. His face was a ghastly white, slick with a sheen of cold sweat, his features twisted into a mask of agony and pure, undiluted hatred. The architect, the master of control, had lost control of everything. His body, his environment, his victim. The sight was terrifying, but for the first time, Olivia felt a sliver of power. She had wounded him. She had survived his final attack. She had called for help. You, he rasped, his voice a choked, gravelly sound. He took a stumbling step toward her, his good hand reaching out as if to claw her back to him. You did this. You ruined it. You ruined everything. The petulant, childish fury in his voice was a bizarre counterpoint to the brutal violence of the preceding moments. He wasn't just angry that she had fought back. He was furious that she had dared to spoil his art piece, to scribble over his perfect blueprint. It was already ruined, Jonas, Olivia said, her own voice surprisingly steady. The recorder was still running, capturing this final, desperate act. It was rotten from the very foundation. You just built a beautiful facade around it. He ignored her, his eyes wild and unfocused. He seemed to be looking past her, out into the immense, black void beyond the glass walls. They'll come now, he muttered to himself, the reality of her message finally sinking in. They'll come and they'll see. They'll tramp through my house with their muddy boots. They'll ask their stupid, grubby questions. His narcissistic rage was so profound, so all-consuming, that even in the face of his own imminent capture, his primary concern was the violation of his aesthetic, the defiling of his creation. Olivia began to edge sideways along the glass wall, moving slowly, deliberately, toward the heavy iron fireplace tools she had noted earlier. The front door was her goal, but she knew she couldn't make a straight run for it. He was wounded, but he was still between her and freedom, and he was still dangerous. Her movement seemed to snap him back to the present. His eyes refocused on her, burning with a fresh wave of venom. You're not getting out of here, he snarled. If I'm going down, you are coming with me. There will be no survivor to tell the story. There will only be a tragedy. A horrific murder-suicide. The brilliant architect, driven to madness by his wife's infidelity and illness. It's not the narrative I planned, but it will suffice. He was rewriting the script in real time, his mind, even in its pained and panicked state, still working to control the story, to shape the perception of his legacy. He began to stalk toward her again, his injured arm held tight to his body, the knife handle jutting out grotesquely. He was a wounded wolf, and that only made him more unpredictable. Olivia reached the fireplace. Her hand closed around the cold, heavy iron of the poker. It was long and solid with a hooked end. It wasn't a knife, but it had reach and weight. She held it in front of her like a spear. Stay back, Jonas, she warned, her voice low and tight. He let out that same, humorless laugh, a sound that grated on her nerves. Or what? You'll poke me? My dear, the time for half measures is over. He lunged again, not with the same speed as before, but with a desperate, clumsy force. He swiped at her with his good hand, trying to grab her, to pull her close. She jabbed with the poker, keeping him at bay, the hooked end catching on his sweater. For a few frantic seconds, they were locked in a bizarre, deadly dance. Him trying to close the distance, her using the length of the iron rod to keep him away. The house of glass, designed for quiet contemplation of beauty, had become a brutal arena. The elegant furniture was in disarray. A shattered lamp lay on the floor, and blood, both his and hers, stained the polished slate. The sophisticated jazz music had long since ended, replaced by their ragged breathing, the scrape of their feet on the floor, and the low, pained grunts from Jonas as his wounded body protested the exertion. He feinted left, then lunged right, finally getting past the poker. He grabbed the front of her jacket, his grip surprisingly strong. He yanked her toward him, his face just inches from hers. She could smell the wine on his breath, the metallic scent of his blood. His eyes were wide and crazed. It ends now, he breathed. He was going to drag her toward the terrace, toward the cliff's edge. It was the only part of his original plan he could still salvage. But it was in that moment, as she was locked in his grasp, that she heard it. It started as a faint, almost imperceptible thrumming, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to travel through the very rock of the mountain. Then it grew, resolving itself into a sound that did not belong in this pristine, silent wilderness. The distant, unmistakable wail of sirens. They were coming. Elin had done it. They were really coming. Jonas heard it too. His head snapped up, his body going rigid. He tilted his head listening, his expression shifting from rage to utter, stark disbelief. The sound grew louder, echoing up the valley, bouncing off the mountain faces. A chorus of impending justice. For Jonas, it was the sound of the end of the world. His grip on her jacket slackened. His face went through a rapid series of transformations. Shock, denial, rage, and then finally a cold, terrifying clarity. The look of a man who has weighed all his impossible options and has chosen the only one that leaves him with a shred of control. No, he whispered, not to her, but to the approaching sirens. No. You will not take me. You will not put me in a cage. He released her so abruptly that she stumbled backward, catching herself on the dining table. He turned away from her, his back to the door, and faced the immense glass wall that overlooked the valley. He looked out at the spectacular view, at the twinkling lights of a town far below, at the sovereign beauty of his mountain kingdom. He then looked at his reflection in the glass. The man staring back was a ruin. His hair was disheveled, his face was pale and contorted in a mask of pain, his expensive sweater was shredded and soaked in his own blood, a kitchen knife protruding from his shoulder. The perfect architect was gone. The monster had been revealed. And he could not live with that reflection. If I cannot have perfection, he said, his voice eerily calm, I will have nothing. He took a step toward the heavy sliding doors that led to the cantilevered terrace. Olivia realized what he was going to do a second before he did it. Jonas, no, she cried out, a reflexive, horrified plea. He didn't look back. With his good hand, he unlatched the sliding door and pushed it open. A blast of cold mountain air rushed into the room, carrying the scent of pine and the now deafening sound of the approaching sirens. He walked out onto the terrace, a solitary figure poised between the wreckage of his perfect house and the infinite, empty blackness of the night sky. He walked to the very edge of the cantilevered platform, to the thin glass railing that was the only thing separating him from a 1,000-foot drop. The first flashing lights, blue and red, appeared on the winding road far below, cutting through the trees, racing toward them. Jonas looked down at the approaching lights, then up at the stars. He took one last look at his masterpiece, this house of glass that had become his stage, his arena, and now his tomb. Then, with a final, chillingly deliberate movement, he turned to face Olivia, who stood frozen in the doorway to the terrace. He gave her a strange, final look, not of hatred, not of apology, but of a kind of defiant, ultimate ownership. It was a look that said, you may have won, but I still control my own exit. And then he simply leaned back, closing his eyes, and let himself fall into the vast, silent emptiness. Olivia didn't scream. She didn't move. She stood there, the cold wind whipping her hair around her face, and watched as his form disappeared instantly into the profound, all-consuming darkness. There was no sound, just the wind, the approaching sirens, and the sudden, deafening silence of his absence. Minutes later, which felt like an eternity, the first police officers burst through the front door, weapons drawn, shouting commands into the empty room. They found her standing on the terrace, a lone figure silhouetted against the night sky, staring down into the abyss where the architect of her nightmare had just authored his own final, terrible chapter. She looked at the armed officers, at their concerned, confused faces. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell them everything. And as the full, crushing weight of her survival washed over her, she finally allowed herself to collapse. The strength that had carried her through the fight, the adrenaline that had fueled her defiance, all of it drained away, leaving her in the waiting, capable hands of her rescuers. The performance was over. The aftermath was a blur, a disorienting collage aside, her bony hands gripping Olivia's with a fierce, grounding pressure, her whispered words a litany of relief of flashing lights, muffled voices, and the coarse, comforting weight of a paramedic's blanket around her shoulders. Olivia, you're safe. You did it, girl. You're safe now. The days that followed were sat on the edge of the sofa. The same sofa where she had feigned unconsciousness just hours before, while the glass blur of official procedure. Statements given from a comfortable chair in a quiet room at the sheriff's department. Not a cold house swarmed with a new kind of life. Uniformed officers, forensic technicians in white coveralls, and grim-faced detectives moved interrogation room. The lead detective, a sharp, empathetic woman named Vasquez, listened to her story with a growing sense of horror, and through the space with a methodical purpose that was a bizarre echo of Jonas's own precision. They were deconstructing his perfect world, piece by piece, cataloging his crimes, their muddy boots scarring the pristine slate floors he had been so desperate to protect. Admiration. Olivia handed over her evidence. The burner phone with its single, damning text message, the tiny audio recorder containing Jonas's full, chilling confession, and a USB drive containing the photographs of the insurance policies, the bank statements, and Clara's death certificate. The audio recording was the linchpin. Detective Vasquez had her listen to it once she gave her statement in a flat, detached monotone, the words spilling out of her as if from a script she had long memorized. She handed over her phone with the photographs of the evidence from the chest. She gave them the burner phone with its log of messages to Elin. And most importantly, she gave them the tiny audio recorder, the silent, in the presence of a department psychologist, to confirm it was Jonas's voice. Hearing it again in the safe, neutral environment of the office was an out-of-body experience. The cool, condescending tone as he confessed witness that had captured Jonas's chilling confessions and his final, narcissistic monologue. As a detective listened to the playback through an earpiece, she saw his expression shift from professional skepticism to stony, horrified certainty. Elin arrived with the second to Clara's murder. The chillingly practical discussion of faking her own death. The raw, narcissistic rage when his plan failed. It was the complete and total self-immolation of a monster, captured in perfect, high-fidelity audio. Wave of police cars, her old sedan looking comically out of place next to the official vehicles. She brushed past a young officer who tried to stop her, her fierce eyes scanning the room until they found Olivia. She strode across the room, ignoring the chaos, and wrapped Olivia in a fierce, bony hug that smelled of old books and righteous fury. You did. There would be no doubt, no ambiguity. The investigation that unfurled was swift and comprehensive. Jonas's body was recovered from the base of the cliff the next morning. The toxicology report from Dr. Thorne became Exhibit A in it. Child, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You did it. For Clara. For yourself. You brought the monster down. In the cold light of dawn, a search and recovery team rappelled down the cliff case that was now a joint homicide investigation spanning multiple jurisdictions. The police, armed with the evidence Olivia had provided, executed a warrant on the loft. They found the locked chest, the remaining vials of submissin, the files. They found his face. They found what was left of Jonas at the bottom, a broken thing amidst the jagged rocks and ancient pines. His reign was definitively over. The architect had met his end at the foundation of his own flawed masterpiece. The weeks that followed were a computer's, his meticulously kept journals, which in his supreme arrogance, detailed his projects in detached pseudoscientific language, referring to his victims not by name but by case numbers. Clara was Case 01. Olivia was Case Crucible. The story of the brilliant architect and his secret, murderous life became a media sensation. The glass house, once a symbol of modernist chic featured in architectural magazines, was now a notorious landmark, its glass walls reflecting a dark and sordid tale. 02. The journals revealed there had been others he had considered, potential subjects he had researched and ultimately rejected for not meeting his criteria. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. The story of the glass house killer. Olivia was insulated from the worst of it by Elin and a team of lawyers she had hired, but the echoes still reached her. She was the survivor, the widow, the one who got away. Labels that felt hollow and ill was a macabre gold mine. A brilliant, handsome architect, a beautiful, talented wife, a secret history of murder, and a dramatic final confrontation in a stunning mountain home. Olivia was hounded, her face splashed across news sites and television fitting. The evidence she had gathered, combined with Elin's testimony and the irrefutable data from the audio recorder and Dr. Thorne's toxicology report, painted a picture so damning that it left no room for doubt. The investigation expanded, a network of cold cases and suspicious deaths, in other states suddenly being re-examined through the lens of Jonas Hale screens. But Elin and Detective Vasquez formed a protective shield around her. She gave one and only one carefully worded statement through a lawyer Elin had hired, then disappeared from public view, retreating to the sanctuary of Elin's quiet, rose-filled home. In the months that followed, she and Elin sifted through the wreckage's predatory pattern. Detectives from 2 other jurisdictions flew in to interview Olivia, and she saw in their eyes the dawning horror that they too had been fooled by the charming, grieving man who had passed through their towns years before. She learned the full scope of his financial machinations. He was deeply in debt, his lavish lifestyle and ambitious projects funded by of Jonas's life, and by extension her own. It was a painful, but necessary process of exorcism. They discovered the full extent of his financial manipulations, the web of lies he had woven to isolate and control not just her, but Clara before her. They found letters from Clara's family, pleading for answers after her death. Letters' precarious tower of loans and investments. The insurance payouts were not just bonuses, they were essential components of his business model. He would build a life with a woman, integrate their finances, take out a massive policy, and then, when her assets were fully entangled with his, he would demolish the foundation and collect the capital needed to start the next project. That Jonas had intercepted and hidden. Olivia, with Elin by her side, made the difficult call to Clara's parents. She told them the truth about their daughter's death. The conversation was agonizing, filled with tears and grief, but at the end of it, Clara's mother had whispered, "Thank you. You have given our daughter justice. You have given her peace." The legal formalities were complex. Since Jonas had died, there would be no criminal trial for him. But he was not just a murderer. He was a human parasite, cloaking his predation in the language of love and ambition. Olivia never returned to the loft. Elin helped her pack her essential belongings one gray afternoon. The vast, empty space feeling haunted and toxic. Olivia moved into Elin's guest room, a cozy, cluttered space with floral wallpaper, and a view legacy was tried and convicted in the court of public opinion, and in the subsequent civil suits. The insurance company, faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud and murder, immediately voided Olivia's policy and launched its own internal investigation, which unearthed a pattern of similar suspicious claims linked to Jonas's associates. His name became a synonym for a particularly chilling brand of domestic evil, Olivia of the Rose Garden. For the first time in years, she slept through the night without the aid of chemical persuasion, though her dreams were often a chaotic replay of her final night in the glass house. She worked with the authorities, with the insurance investigators, with the lawyers. She became an expert in the geography of her own trauma, recounting the events with a calm, detached precision that unnerved some, but was, for her, the only way to maintain control. She was no longer the victim of the story. She was its primary narrator, its chief historian. The legal battles were complex, but ultimately successful. The insurance company, faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud and murder, voided the policy on her life. The contents of Jonas's secret bank accounts were frozen, and eventually awarded to her as part of a settlement. The loft and the glass house were sold, the transactions handled by lawyers so she would never have to set foot in either place again. One day, Sitting inherited nothing of Jonas's blood-soaked estate. She wanted nothing. The loft, the glass house, the expensive cars, the secret bank accounts, it was all tainted. Through her lawyer, she arranged for the entire estate to be liquidated. The proceeds were used to establish the Clara Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to raising awareness about subtle forms of domestic abuse and coercive control, and providing legal and financial support for victims. Elin sat on the board of directors. It was a legacy of light, born from profound darkness. As for her own life, Olivia knew she could not return to what was. The loft was no longer a home, it was a crime scene. The city, with its towering glass structures, felt like a constant, suffocating reminder of him. She needed a new beginning, a real one, not the twisted version Jonas had envisioned. She sold her share of the design firm she had co-founded, packed a single suitcase with the few personal belongings that held no memory of him, and left the city for good. She drove south down the coast, with no destination in mind, just a need for salt air and an open horizon. She found what she was looking for in a small, windswept town on the coast of Oregon. It was a place of dramatic, rocky shores, constant mist, and a wild, untamable sea. It was the opposite of the static, perfect clarity of the mountains in Elin's sun-drenched kitchen. She asked the question that had been hovering in the back of her mind. Why do you think he did it, Elin? The money was a part of it, I know. But it felt like more than that. Elin looked up from her gardening magazine, her expression thoughtful. Jonas loved to build things, she said slowly. Perfect, beautiful things that he could control completely. But people are not buildings, Olivia. They are messy. They have their own will, their own thoughts. They change. When you or Clara stopped being the perfect, compliant additions to his perfect life, when you developed your own cracks and flaws in his eyes, you ceased to be part of the design. You became a structural problem. And Jonas dealt with structural problems in the only way he knew how, demolition. The explanation was chilling, but it rang true. She was not just an obstacle to his financial gain. She was It was a place of change, of motion, of life. She bought a small, weathered cottage set on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was old and imperfect, with creaking floors and windows that rattled in the wind. She painted the walls warm, soft colors. She filled it with mismatched furniture from local antique shops, with books, with plants that thrived in the coastal light. She adopted a scruffy dog from the local shelter, a mutt with one floppy ear and an inexhaustible capacity for affection. For the first year, she did not design. She walked on the beach for hours with her dog, letting the roar of the waves wash over her. A powerful, cleansing sound that drowned out the echoes of the past. She read. She cooked simple meals. She slept long and deep, free from the chemical haze that had clouded her mind for so long. She slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt the foundations of her own aesthetic offense to his narcissistic worldview. With the money from the settlements, Olivia did not buy a new loft or a designer car. She established the Clara Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal and psychological support to victims of domestic abuse, with a special focus on subtle forms of coercion and medical gaslighting. She poured her energy into it, finding a new purpose in ensuring that other women, who might not be as lucky as she was, would have a voice and a lifeline. Herself. The trauma was not gone. It was a part of her now, a landscape of scars she would carry forever. Some nights, she would wake up from a dream of falling, her heart pounding, the ghost of his hands on her throat. But she would reach out and feel the warm, breathing presence of her dog beside her. She would listen to the rhythmic crash of the waves outside her window. And she would ground herself in the reality of her survival. After a year, she began to create again. She set up a small studio in a spare room overlooking the ocean. But she didn't return and served on the board, her sharp wit and fierce advocacy becoming a legendary asset. When the dust had finally settled, after the last legal paper was signed and the last reporter had stopped calling, Olivia knew she could not stay. The city, the mountains, the entire region was haunted by the ghost of Jonas Hale. She needed a new landscape, a new view. She bought a small, weathered cottage on the coast of Oregon. It was the antithesis of the glass house. It was made of wood and stone, built to withstand the wind and the salt spray, not to float above the world. It was to the sleek, corporate world of graphic design. She began to paint. Large, abstract canvases filled with color and texture and motion. Her paintings were not minimalist or controlled. They were wild, emotional, full of the churning chaos of the sea and the quiet resilience of the coastal landscape. They were full of life. She signed her paintings simply Olivia. Not Olivia Reed, not Olivia Hale. Just Olivia. One crisp autumn afternoon, 2 years after the night in the glass house, she was having her first small gallery show in a nearby town. She stood in the corner, watching people mill about, looking at her work. Elin had driven down for the opening, her sharp eyes scanning the paintings with a proud, approving small and cozy, with a fireplace that crackled and uneven floorboards that creaked. It was imperfect and real. Her studio was a converted sunroom that looked out directly onto the Pacific Ocean. The view was not a static, majestic mountain range. It was a constantly changing seascape of roiling gray waves, gentle blue swells, and fiery sunsets. The air was thick with the scent of salt and rain. She started to design again. At first, her hands felt clumsy, her mind hesitant. But slowly it came back. Her new work was different. The clean, minimalist lines of her past were gone, replaced glint. A man approached her, a kind-faced man with a gentle smile. "These are incredible," he said. gesturing to a large canvas of swirling blues and greens. There's so much power in them. So much life. Olivia smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. Thank you, she said. I had a good teacher. He looked puzzled. Oh, who was that? She looked out the gallery window towards the distant gray line of the ocean. The sea, she said. It taught me that the most beautiful things are not perfect or still. They are the ones that survive the storm. The house of glass was a memory, by organic shapes, rich textures, and deep, complex colors inspired by the ocean and the coastal forests. There was a strength, a raw, vital energy in her new designs that had never been there before. She was no longer creating for brands. She was creating for herself. Sometimes, on stormy nights when the wind howled and the waves crashed against the shore, she would be pulled back to the memory of the glass house. She would feel the phantom pressure of his fingers on her throat, see the glint of the needle in the firelight. The trauma was a part of her now, a scar on her soul. But it was not all of her. It did not define her. One cool autumn afternoon, she was a ghost story that belonged to someone else. Her house now was a small, sturdy cottage by the sea, its foundations sunk deep into the solid earth. And from its windows, every single day, she could see the horizon, vast and open and full of endless, beautiful possibility. She was the architect of her own life now, and she was building it to last.